Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to another episode of Monuments Monday. And on this episode, we thought we'd talk about the monument to the 44th New York. Now, the monument was actually dedicated on July 3rd, 1893. The monument was designed by Daniel Butterfield, and this monument actually was placed here at a cost of $10,965. So at the time, it was the most expensive regimental monument that had been erected on the entire field. So not only did the monument use the money allocated from the state of New York for regimental monuments, but also private contributions went to the monument. And largely the monument is made from Prospect Hill, Maine granite. And I always like to point out to people that it took a while to put up a monument like this. And after it was placed, it became one of the more popular monuments to have your photograph in front of. And we're going to show some images here of parties in front of the 44th New York Monument. And you might know that the original road placed in by the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association and later paved by the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission actually came up here on top of the hill. So people were riding their cars up here and getting pictures taken with their vehicles and their guides. And in one photograph we have given to us by one of our donors, we actually have Frank Penn, or William Francis Penn, the first black battlefield tour guide with a party here on Little Round Top. And just some of the pictures that were taken at this site are, amongst the best known photographs made into postcards. And so I'll show a couple of my favorite postcard views of this monument. And I wanted to also mention that at the time in the 50s and the 60s into the early 80s, redbuds dominated Little Round Top, and there's a lot of views of the redbuds on the hill. And I wanted to mention that a lot of people come to the battlefield as kids remember this monument affectionately. It's a castle. And, obviously kids love castles. And on one of my first family visits to the battlefield, my father took images of our family here. So here's a couple images, me and my family up on top of Little Round Top on the cannon, my brothers and sister, and a picture of my brother and sister on top of the platform at the 44th New York. And I actually have a picture of me down at the 16th Michigan taken by my father. And if you look, you might notice in the 70s, the whole side of Little Round Top was wooded. And it wasn't until later they cleared it to their more of their Civil War appearance. Now I also wanted to mention that the monument, although it was dedicated in 1893, construction on the monument actually started a few years earlier. And we have an article from November 1890, and it mentions from the Gettysburg paper, on the crest of Little Round Top, the large excavation for the foundation of the joint 12th New York, 44th New York monument has been made. And there's an article from September 22nd, 1891. And in the article it mentions, work is in active progress on the joint monument of the 44th and 12th New York regiments on Little Round Top. The material is from Bath, Maine, and it is unloaded from cars at the park. They're talking about, Round Top Park. Last week, a traction engine was used to pull up some of the heavier stones. And you can only imagine the system of pulleys and derrick they used to construct the monument. And I'll show you here an image. There are stones around the monument that still have these steel rods that were placed into the stone to probably hold the cables in place that held the pulley system up to get the stones on top of this monument. So it's quite incredible when you think about it. As many of the other regiments that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, you can learn a lot about the Civil War by just reading their monuments. The 44th New York has an excellent regimental history, by the way. But they mentioned it organized in 1861, and you know, they had 1,000 men at the beginning of the war. And throughout the war, men were added into this unit. You can see they started with 1,096 men, and throughout the war, they added men to the unit. Now, this unit was organized as the Ellsworth Avengers. You might know that Elmer Ellsworth was one of the first Union officers. Actually, I guess he's the first Union officer killed during the war in Alexandria. And according to their regimental history, at a meeting of the citizens of Albany to take action concerning the assassination of the gallant and lamented Elmer Ellsworth, held on May 27, 1861, it was resolved that the undersigned immediately organize an association to be called the Ellsworth Association of the State of New York, for the purpose of raising a regiment in honor of the lamented Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, to avenge his death, that one soldier be solicited from each town and each ward in the state of New York to be chosen by the people of that town, that each candidate must be an able-bodied man, temperate, of good moral character, not less than 5 feet 8 inches in height, and not exceeding 30 years of age. Now, I don't know exactly how successful they were at getting a man from every town in the state of New York, but it is said that they had at least one man from every county in New York as part of this regiment. So quite an interesting makeup at the beginning of the war. And, you know, you can look at the casualty figures of this unit throughout the war. Killed 3 officers and 122 men. You know, wounded during the war, 35 officers, 504 men. You might notice, died of disease, 2 officers and 145 men. This unit, like many other units, had more men that died of disease than were killed in action. And at the Battle of Gettysburg, they had the average size of a regiment, 313, about 300 men is the average size, and they suffered the average loss of a regiment at Gettysburg, about a third. 106 out of 313. So I think one of the most interesting things about this monument is the fact that they put the names of every man that served in this regiment during the American Civil War on one of the plaques inside the monument. And, you know, the Pennsylvania Monument has something similar to this, but this is really interesting for a regimental monument. And, you know, they have Company A, Company B, Company C. Here's Company H. And you might notice there are 4 men named Schermerhorn. And that's one of the things about the American Civil War that is most interesting, or maybe kind of sad sometimes. A unit is all from one town. There are brothers and uncles and cousins and fathers and sons all in the same units. And when a unit's in a tight spot in the battle, the unit's wiped out, and a town is wiped out, and a family is wiped out. And fathers and sons and brothers and cousins are killed side by side. And you can only imagine, after a horrible battle, a town getting information about all their relatives. So these Schermerhorns, I'm not exactly sure of their relationship, but I know that John H. Schermerhorn was 27, and he was wounded in the fighting. He appears on the casualty list. And Myron Schermerhorn here, he was actually killed at the Battle of Hatcher's Run in 1865. Also inside the monument, we have Daniel Butterfield, who was the original colonel of the 12th New York that also has an association with this monument, and Francis Channing Barlow, who had an association with the 12th New York. Now, of course, Butterfield, he was actually in command of the brigade that the 44th New York was involved in early in the war. And you might know the story. He had a bugle call associated with his brigade, and they tell this story in the movie Gettysburg if you're paying close attention. And the bugle call is Dan, 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 Butterfield, Butterfield. And when they give that call, of course, then the next order will be for that brigade specifically. And the soldiers got used to hearing that in their camps, and it usually meant that they're going to march quite a distance that day, and so they started to sing, damn, 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 Butterfield, Butterfield, which I find interesting. Of course, you might also know that it was Dan Butterfield who actually came up with the bugle call for the Army at rest, taps. Now, you might know that there's also a plaque on the top of this monument that talks about the 12th New York. Two companies of the 12th New York were headquarters guards, I believe, for the 5th Army Corps at the Battle of Gettysburg. And of course, Daniel Butterfield was the chief of staff for General Meade's army at Gettysburg. And a couple other things, the monument is 44 feet tall. It's the 44th New York. And the top is kind of 12-foot long. It's kind of a 12-foot square, according to the accounts, to represent the 12th, and of course the height for the 44th. And, you know, as a kid, I mean, you know, you gotta come to Little Round Top, you gotta climb up in the castle, and I'll bet you all the Civil War historians in our video have fond memories of being at the regimental monument for the 44th New York Volunteer Infantry. Another interesting feature of this monument is the fact that Daniel Edgar Sickles spoke at the dedication of the 12th New York, 44th New York monument. He had been associated with the 12th New York early on. And if you read his speech, which is in New York at Gettysburg, it's kind of filled with the same lies that he tells about the battle in his other written accounts. But there's this interesting passage in it. I can well understand how handsome you must have been, and as good-looking young people always like to have their picture taken, I think it quite natural that you should have that desire. I think you might have your picture taken once more on the historic ground, and I think the photographer could do no better than to get into position now. This is really odd that it's printed as part of his speech, as if he had planned this. So the cameraman, who of course was William Tipton at Gettysburg, came over to get in position to take a group photograph in front of the monument, and the veterans turned their backs on him. And they told him he was not going to take their picture and that he was to leave immediately. And according to one account, he would not leave. He argued with him, and the veterans went over and knocked his camera down. And he actually tried to sue the party from New York for damages after this. I don't, you know, there's a lot of articles in the paper about this. I'm not sure how successful he was in getting some money from the New York Commission, but this actually all had to do with the fact that the Gettysburg electric trolley had just opened up and desecrated the area where the veterans had fought, and it was well known that William Tipton was one of the promoters of the Gettysburg Electric Railway. So they kind of took revenge on him at this spot. Remember, if you like the content that we continue to put on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe.